Wishing all of you happy Mother's Day today. And we got some exciting stuff for us today, including at the end of this service, we're going to be doing some baby dedications. So if you're a parent and you brought your baby for dedication or your child this morning for dedication, we'll be doing those at the end of the service. So if you need to put them in the nursery or children's church for a little bit, you can always retrieve them right after the sermon here, and we'll be doing those baby dedications. So I thought it was appropriate today to talk about my kids on Mother's Day and how different they are. My middle daughter, Libby, she loves to serve, and she's actually a really good cook. The favorite room in the house that she has, by far, is in the kitchen. She loves to be in the kitchen. She loves cooking. She's constantly serving other people. In fact, a lot of times she'll notice when I'm in a hurry or I'm going to be late for work, or she thinks, oh, he's just not had time to eat. She'll fry me some eggs for breakfast, and she'll get that done. Or she'll be baking fresh cookies for people, or making lattes or coffee, or preparing people lunch. And even as I was preparing this message, I was watching my two daughters. I was sitting in the kitchen, and my older daughter, Gracie, she's different. And don't worry, you'll get to meet her. She's great. She's actually interning here at the church, so she'll be up here on stage a couple times this summer as well. But she's got this thing that she does when she's late for something, and we actually have named it because we can see it in her eyes and we can see it in her actions when she is in a hurry, and we call it the Gracie Rush. And it's hurried everywhere she goes because she knows if she doesn't get out the door pretty soon she's going to be late, and she's like her father. She underestimates how much time it's going to take to do certain tasks. And I'm sitting there in the kitchen, and I was working on this message, and I'm watching the Gracie Rush take place. And Libby pipes up from over next to the kitchen sink and says, "What can I do to help you get out the door?" Aww. What a sweet girl. She's blushing over there. It's not safe to be my kids or my friends for these kinds of stories. You're going to end up in a sermon somewhere sometime. And then there's Gracie, and she is sunshine. She's the life of the party. She's an absolute joy. But let's just say that thoughtful acts of service are not really her jam. She's got lots of other great qualities, and compared to a lot of people, she's a very thoughtful person, just not when you put her next to Libby. About a month ago, Gracie and I were invited on a hunting trip with a neighbor friend. We were supposed to meet up with him before daylight, and we were going to ride out to where we were going to hunt together. And we went over, and we got in his truck with him, and he looked at Gracie, and he said, I had it in my mind, I was sure that you were going to bring me a fresh, hot latte this morning for our road trip. There was a pause from the back seat. She was sitting behind me, so I couldn't see her, but I was imagining what she looked like, and I think it was like this. There was a pause, and then I hear from the back seat, "I'm not Libby." Two sisters, very different personalities. In our story today, we meet two sisters with very different personalities. As a matter of fact, they're so famously different that we actually have canonized these two women and their particular personalities, and we begin asking people, are you more of a Mary or are you more of a Martha, right? Luke chapter 10, beginning in verse 38, reads like this. It says, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where there was a woman named Martha, and who opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. And she came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you're worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what's better, and it will not be taken away from her. The scene is Martha's home in Bethany. It was on the eastern slope of Mount of Olives. Bethany was a small town about 1.5 miles from Jerusalem. Martha had a home there, and Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem, and he stopped by his friend's house, and as Middle Eastern hospitality would ask, the host went to excess to prepare an elaborate meal for a guest of honor. And Martha was, as the host, was busy with all the preparations, and I have to say this morning that I love Marthas. And chances are, you probably do too. Marthas make the world go round. They do. They make the world go round. We all have to eat, we all have to live, and we all know people that are so heavenly minded they're of no earthly good. But that's not Martha's. Martha's are doers. By the time the rest of us are done analyzing the best way to do a thing, they've already finished it. That's my wife. My wife, Angie, she's a Martha. Work ethic has never been her problem. But you know what I want more than anything from my wife? It's not all the stuff that she does, as nice as those things are. What I really want most from her is what my kids want most from me, and that is my undivided attention. They want me distraction-free, which unfortunately in the busyness of life can be a rarity. Martha thought there was a whole lot of things that were necessary for the Lord's comfort, but her company meant more to him than her cooking. Martha forgot that Jesus had come to serve, not to be served. Remember at the Last Supper, and Jesus is washing the disciples' feet, and he's going around one at a time, and he's washing their feet, and he comes to Simon Peter, and what does Peter say to Jesus? Not so fast. You're not going to serve me. Lord, are you going to wash my feet? You will never wash my feet. And what does Jesus say to Peter? Peter, unless I serve you, you have no part in me. Jesus came to serve, not to be served. And then there's Mary, sitting spellbound at the feet of Jesus. And her attitude toward Jesus is consistent with Jewish thought regarding the honor of hosting a rabbi. The Jewish Talmud, one of their ancient books, says, "Let your house be a meeting house for the sages. Sit amidst the dust of their feet and drink in their words with thirst." It's the only thing Mary's mentioned doing in the text. Her only activity is passive, but she shows us what her priorities were by her actions. She's at Jesus' feet, listening to his word, where a true disciple ought to be. And I love how Jesus, in a culture and in a day when all the disciples were men, Jesus welcomes women to be his followers, his disciples, even though it was culturally unacceptable. What I want you to see, because I think a lot of times when we talk about this story and we look at Mary versus Martha, our assumptions are that Mary is good and Martha is bad. But I want you to see something a little bit different this morning. I don't think it's so much a good versus bad as much as it is a good versus better, or better versus best. The thing I want you to see is that both Mary and Martha, both of them desired to please Jesus. And if it wasn't for Jesus' commentary on this event, we would probably have a hard time deciding which one honored Jesus more. In his excellent book on marriage, Gary Chapman outlines 5 love languages. And these love languages, if you're having trouble in your marriage, or even if you just want a framework for understanding your spouse better and communicating better and loving each other well, I highly recommend Gary Chapman's 5 love languages. In the 5 love languages, he lists these 5 different languages that people communicate in ways that they want to give and receive love from someone else. And those 5 love languages are, number 1, gifts. And those are those things that people, they think of ways that they can serve somebody else. And when they think of how can I love somebody well, they think of, I want to go out and I want to show them that I'm thinking of them by buying them gifts. That's one way that people communicate love. Secondly, there's words of affirmation. This would be giving compliments. And some people just love to get compliments, and they're like a sponge and they soak them up. And there's physical touch, and there's acts of service, and there's quality time. Those are the 5 love languages. And the premise of the book is that each one of us tends to give love to someone else in the way that we prefer to receive it. And the problem is that we're giving love in the way that we want to receive it, but we might not be speaking our spouses or our friends' love language. And so what happens is we love them the way we want to be loved, but we're not loving them the way that they feel most loved. And so it's almost as if you're speaking Spanish to somebody who's speaking English, and they're not getting it. They're not understanding. When we pinpoint somebody else's love language, they feel loved because we're speaking their language. What do you think about Jesus? What was Jesus' love language? Jesus, you probably think, well, he's God, of course, so he's perfectly rounded, right? He's perfectly rounded individual, so he probably has all of the love language. Well, the Bible also says Jesus was human, just like you and I are. He had a personality. If he took a personality assessment profile, he would probably fit under the Taylor Johnson personality. He would come up as a personality, just like you and I would. What was Jesus' love language? I think the answer is found right here in the story. See, Martha was communicating to Jesus in which of these 5, put those 5 love languages back up on the screen. In which of these 5 love languages was Martha communicating? Should have been number 4, right? Acts of service. She's trying to serve Jesus. But how does Jesus want to receive love? Notice what is Mary communicating love to Jesus out of these 5 love languages? Should be number 5, right? Quality time. Sitting at Jesus' feet, listening to him. And what does Jesus say about which one his preference is? Apparently, Jesus' love language is quality time, and he affirms Mary's way of showing love to him over and above Martha's. And I think there's some reasons for that. We'll get into that. I want you to notice verse 39 and 40. Martha had a sister called Mary, sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. That's Mary. Then you got verse 40, you got Martha distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. And the application for us is simple, and that is don't let the busyness distract you from the blessing. How many of you live a busy life? You got a lot to do, right? Yeah, I was always under the impression that once I retire, everything will slow down. I hear retirees laughing because it's not true. When you retire, you wonder, how did I ever have time to go to work, right? Yeah. Life is busy. And busyness is the antithesis of discipleship. Busyness is really my attempt to validate my life. How many of you have ever used the response when somebody asks you, how you been? What's the word? Busy. See, if I'm busy, what it means is that I'm a person in such high demand that everybody wants a piece of me, and that makes me feel important. Right? Busyness is my way of validating my life. If I'm busy, I must be important. But it's not what we do for Jesus that makes us stand out as Christians. As a matter of fact, I would say it this way, busy Christians blend in, right? Busy Christians blend in because, let's face it, when people come into the church from out there in the culture, they're not coming in here to experience what they're experiencing out there. They're coming in here because they want to experience something different. And when Christians step off the rat race and we set aside time and we create space and we create margins in our life in order to sit at the feet of Jesus, we are doing something extremely countercultural. We take that time to spend with Jesus. Busy Christians blend in. But it's Christians that choose to sit at the feet of Jesus that turn heads in a hurried world. If I, as your pastor, only preached things I had mastered, there'd be very few sermons. This is confession time. God has a sense of humor, and he always gives a message that I need so that I can apply it to myself, and then whatever's left over I can deliver to you. I've had a few busy weeks, and there's probably going to be a few more busy weeks like it before Aaron gets back. He's on sabbatical until middle of July, which means that Isaac and I got to step up and fill some big shoes. We've got other great people on the stage here that filled in this morning as well, but there's lots of other things that go on behind the scenes that Aaron takes care of. I need this message more than anyone in this room today. I can easily fall into the Martha trap of the distraction of busyness. But what I want us to see this morning is that what we do with Jesus is far more important than what we do for him. Do you understand the difference? What we do with him is more important than what we do for him. Jesus shows us here that our first item of business with him isn't business at all. It's really to sit with him, to let him love us, to teach us, to let us hear from him and understand his heart and his love for us. Unless we meet with Jesus personally and privately every day, we soon end up like Martha, busy but not blessed. Sometimes when the busyness of life ratchets up, the first thing to go is our quiet time in the morning that we set aside to get alone with Jesus. One of the things that we're working on as a church, one of my mentors, his name's Chuck Phillips, he's actually been writing a prayer journal. He's been sitting with Jesus for many years. And he's really well studied in this, and he's really well practiced in this. And his quiet time is one that I want to model my own after. And so I've asked him, said, hey, Chuck, would you take what you're doing in your prayer time and make it usable for the entire church family? And one of the things that I'm excited to roll out this year in the coming weeks and months is a quarterly prayer journal that we're going to publish here as a church. And it's going to walk you through this because I think we're really famous at the church for laying guilt trips on people for not doing things they don't know how to do. Or for telling people to do things and then not giving them the tools they need to be successful at it. So one of the things we want to do is we want to provide a prayer journal. And whether you've been a Christian for 2 months or 20 or 30 or 50 years, we can all grow closer to Jesus, can't we? By sitting at his feet. And this prayer journal will be one of those ways, one of these discipleship journals will be one of those ways that we can help you grow in that discipline of sitting with Jesus. Verses 40 through 42, you see Martha's reaction as she looks around and she's having kitchen conniptions and pots and pans are being slammed harder and harder in hopes that her sister will get the memo, right? All the body language and all of that. And she comes to Jesus finally in exasperation and says, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Could be said more forcefully. It expects a positive answer. He's more like, Lord, you do care, don't you? Don't you see the problem here? That I'm doing all the work and she's doing nothing. And I want to know how many of you parents have seen this play out after dinner with after dinner chores in your home on a regular basis, right? You see this happen, right? You got you got after dinner, you got the chores, the dishes to be done, and inevitably one of you was the one that was distracted with table talk while everybody else was up cleaning up. And you know who you are. If you are that person, maybe it rotates and it's a different person each week. But in our house, there's one particular, and I'm not going to embarrass her today, but there's one in particular that gets distracted with all the socializing and then forgets about the work until other people step in and remind her, say, hey, wait a minute, I've done all of this and you haven't touched a dish yet. Right? Mary and Martha plays out every week in homes all across La Pine. I'm sure yours is no different from mine. But I want you to notice Jesus' response to Martha. He loves her. How do we know that? Verse 41. Martha, Martha. Repeats it twice. Anytime the Jewish people would repeat things twice like this, it was a deep emotional love. When King David learned that his beloved son Absalom had been killed by soldiers, he cried out, Absalom, Absalom, my son, my son. When Jesus, at his triumphal entry, looked at Jerusalem that was rejecting her king, and Jesus said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how long I have longed to gather you like a mother hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. Jesus at the Last Supper, Simon got his chest all puffed out, and Peter says, Lord, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And Jesus said, Simon, Simon, I tell you the truth, before the rooster crows, you'll deny even that you know me 3 times. And Jesus looks at Martha and loved her. Martha, Martha. Deep love. Deep understanding that she was loving Jesus in the way that she felt like she could. She wanted to serve him extravagantly, but her priorities needed adjustment. And Jesus said, you're upset about so many things. You got all these irons in the fire. You're so busy. Blaise Pascal said it well. He said, the last thing one knows is what to put first. What a tragedy that we human beings can go through our entire life with messed up priorities, and we don't discover it until near the end. Young people, if you want to know a thing or two about priorities, ask someone who's got, well, we'll just say a little more of life in the rearview mirror than they do in the windshield. Ask them, what are their deepest regrets? They'll tell you. And those deep regrets are often the very things that we as younger people, I'm not very young anymore, I'm middle-aged, but then I don't know that many people that are 92, so maybe I'm past that. The last thing we know is what to put first. Jesus says, Martha, you're concerned about all these different things, but there's only really one thing, one simple priority, and Mary's chosen it. Here's the application. We need to prioritize sitting with Jesus over serving him. Priorities matter. And often we live our lives tending to the tyranny of the urgent rather than being intentional about putting first things first. To illustrate this, I think the Bible tells a great story in Genesis 1 of the creation of humanity. As people, we often define ourselves by our work. We're told, figure out what your calling is in life and what you've been created to do, and then build your career, your work life around your calling. I agree, there's great merit in discerning your calling with regard to your work. But do you ever stop to think about what Adam did on the first full day after he was created? Of course, you know, humanity was God's crowning achievement. He created humanity to rule over the fish, the sea, the birds, the air, the things that crawl along the ground. Adam's first full day of life after he was created, man was created on day 6, and on day 7, God did what? He rested. Not because God was tired. God never gets tired. He rested as an example to us. So Adam's fresh and clean there in the garden. He's brand new, and everything around him is brand new, and the creation is beautiful, and it's perfect. And he's in the Garden of Eden. And what's the first thing he does? He was created on Friday. What was his first full day? Day of rest. Day of worship. I believe God was setting priorities for humanity. See, most of us think about needing a break from our work, so we need a Sabbath day to break. God worked and then rested, but Adam rested and then he worked. The nuance may be small, and you might think, what's the big deal? We were created to work out of a place of rest, not rest out of a place of work. And God has designed us to find our fulfillment, to find our being, to find ourselves in who he is, not just in our work. Work has value, don't get me wrong. But sitting at the feet of Jesus is the priority we're called to live. God has created us not for what we can do for him. That's a pagan philosophy, right? That's what all the pagan religions did. They believed that humanity was made from the blood of an evil God, that the gods were in a fight, and they created man from the blood of an evil God who had evil intentions for us, and he created us for one sole purpose, and that was that humanity would serve the gods. That is not the God of Christianity. That is not the God who created the heavens and the earth. The God who created the heavens and earth didn't create us to serve him. He created us to rest in him, to love him, to be in relationship with him. Because it's easy to forget we were created first for rest and relationship with God, not for work and what we can do for him. When we believe that we're primarily servants of God, it leads to an older brother mentality in the story of the prodigal son when he said to his father, "All these years I've been slaving for you." Do you hear the misconception that the older brother has about who his father is? He sees God not as a loving father, he sees him as a slave driver. Especially for those of us who are serving in ministry, sometimes we can think it's all about the task. It's all about getting the work done. And God says, no, the priority is you sit with me. And work comes out of that. Let me fill you. Let me serve you first, and then you will have something to offer the world around you. Mary has chosen the part that's better, sitting over serving. Sitting with Jesus. It's time well wasted, isn't it? That's how the world sees it. Waste of time. But to sit with Jesus is to love him. And our service to him comes out of that. When we only serve, it leads us to bitterness. So moms, today is Mother's Day, and many of you carry a burden of responsibility to care for and nurture your family and provide for them. And it's a heavy, heavy load. And the last thing that I want to do as you leave today is add one more thing to an already heavy burden that you're carrying. Sitting at Jesus' feet is not escapism. It's not denial. It doesn't mean when you say amen as you finish your prayer and your quiet time that all your to-do list will automatically be a to-done list. That's not how it works. Sitting with Jesus is a sacrifice of priority, but it's worth the time. Last thing I want you to do is feel like one more thing. The straw that broke the camel's back has now been laid on you as you go out these doors. Socrates spoke the truth when he said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And the philosophers would say it's worth every minute to sit down and prioritize and think about what are all the activities I'm doing and not add one more thing, but say, what can I cut out so that I have margin to do the very most important things? And that's Jesus' message to Martha. Is Martha, you got all these distractions, you're doing all these things. Look at what Mary's doing. There are some things inevitably in life that we have to say no to. We have to say no to. I'm going to ask the worship team to come up right now. And I want to ask you this morning to take this moment during this invitation song to examine your own life. Or maybe it's going to take more work than that. Maybe it's going to be sitting down for a few moments and categorizing all the things that are going on and all of the appointments and dates and programs and everything else that's going on in your life, and to be able to look at those things and say, how do I prioritize this? What can I say no to? So what good things do I have to say no to so I can say yes to great things? How can I prioritize my life in such a way that I have time to sit with Jesus? It's truly the hardest work you'll ever have to do is to say no to good things so you can say yes to the most important things. And I tell you, there's nothing that delights Jesus' more than your presence with him. That's what he wants. He's serving him, that's one thing. That's important, but that's one thing. He wants you to sit with him and make that commitment today. I love what Mark Twain said. He said, never allow someone to be your priority while you remain their option. So you are Jesus' priority. He was on his way to Jerusalem that day, perhaps for the last time. And he stopped and he spent time with two sisters that meant the world to him. They were his priority. Don't make the mistake of letting Jesus be your option today. Do that hard work. Sit with him. We're going to stand and sing this invitation song. I want to invite you to do business with the Lord as we sing. I'm going to ask the parents who are doing child dedications to come up here and get ready to come up on the stage here on this left-hand side.